All right, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 3:03 p.m. But before we begin, the SFSS respectfully acknowledges that it is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, Swallowtoos, and Coquitlam and Katzie nations. Unceded means that these territories have never been handed over, sold, or given up by these nations, and we are currently situated in unceded territory. So I'm going to go to roll call of attendance. When I call on your position, please state your name, pronouns, and access needs. I will start with myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Judith. She, her pronouns. All my access needs are met. I will move on to the ex officio president. President is not here. We will move on to VP Finance and Services.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abby. He, him pronouns, and all my access needs are met. Thank you.
Thank you. Mathematics counselor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben. Pronouns he, him, and all my access needs are met.
Awesome. I'm going to move to psychology counselor.
Yeah, hello. My name is Mark. He, him pronouns. All my access needs are met. Thank you.
Thank you. Society of Arts and Social Sciences.
Hi, my name is Hill. She, her. My access needs are mainly met. My microphone is generally kind of garbage, so I will prefer to type in the chat today. Yeah.
Thank you for letting us know. We can move on to our society staff, policy, research, and community affairs coordinator.
Hi, everyone. My name is BT. Pronoun she, has. My access needs are met, but my internet's a little bit down. So if I turn off my camera, probably I'm trying to manage that.
All good. Thank you for joining us, BT. I will move on to administrative assistant. Rianne in the chat. So Rianne says, my name is Rianne. She, her pronouns. All my access needs are met. Thank you for being here today, Rianne. So as of now, that's pretty much all we have for roll call attendance. So I will move us along to the consent agenda, which is 4.1, which reads, be it resolved to adopt the consent agenda by unanimous consent. In the consent agenda, we have 4.1.1, matters arising from the minutes, governance committee minutes from June 20th of 2022, which just says, be it resolved to receive and file the following meeting minutes from the previous meeting. So I'm going to go and seek unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or say something. Okay, seeing none, I assume that is carried. We can move on to item number 5, adoption of the agenda. So it reads, be it resolved to adopt the agenda as presented. I will move. Can I get a second? Math seconds. I'm opening up the floor for discussion and amendments. If you have an amendment, please list yourself in the chat. We have a list from Mathematics Counselor. Go ahead.
I'd like to amend the agenda to include the 2 motions outlined in the attachment I just sent.
Okay. Okay. All right, so that will be, are they in reference to the same? No, they're 2 separate policies, right?
They are 2 separate motions, yes.
Awesome, thank you. So I suggest that we make the recommendation to council, CRAI terms of reference, updates, motion 10.0, I guess, because yeah, sounds about right. So this is the most, it won't let me paste. Rianne, it's in the attachment. It won't let me paste into the chat. I'm sorry. So it will be motion, yeah, thank you, Rayanne. So it should be motion 9.10, and then the second one is the IEC 9 change recommendation to council, which, and that should be 9.11. All right, cool. So, sorry, Rianne. There's another one. I would also like to add another amendment. I think we're going to move it as a batch. And I'm going to also probably just drop it in the chat. I am also adding a motion that should be, I guess, 9.12 at that point. That is in regard to recommendation to council, change to R9 and SO22. So I'm gonna quickly just, I guess, drop that in the chat for folks to get an idea of what we're doing. So I'm going to move this as a batch. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
Math.
VP Finance seconds. I'm going to move this to a vote. Anybody in opposition to the amendments, make your presence known. Seeing none, I guess we're moving back to the main motion, which now reads, be it resolved to adopt the agenda as amended. I will seek unanimous consent. If you dissent, please raise your hand. Seeing none, the agenda is amended and carried, and we will be moving on to new business. So item number 9.1, which reads recommendation to council NP1, submitted by myself, and it reads, be it resolved that governance committee formally recommends to council the adoption of the following changes to NP1. And it basically reads NP1 language changes, whereas NP1 references executive committee elections, whereas NP1 still references the old board model, be it resolved to strike board of directors and replace it with executive committee. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. Opening up for discussion up to the floor. Just as a little context, board of directors is still a reference that we call council. Everybody who's a council member is a board of director, but in the context of this line, it is explicitly calling executive committee board of directors only, which is not really what's happening because the election is in reference to executive committee elections. So that should be updated before we have more people assuming that only exec committee is a board of director. And if you want to look at it more closely, it's also added in the attachments in the agenda. So anybody have any questions, comments? Seeing none, I will be moving this to a vote. I will be seeking unanimous consent. If you dissent, please raise your hand or list in the chat. Seeing none, that recommendation will be passed on to council. We can move on to item number 9.2, recommendation to council NP3, again submitted by myself. It reads, be it resolved that governance committee formally recommends to council to adopt the following changes to NP3. NP3 language changes and safeguard updates, which reads, be it resolved to strike NP 3.2 and replace it with, no candidate is permitted to run for more than one position during the executive committee elections. Be it further resolved that to strike NP 3.3 and replace it with, proposed candidates must conduct themselves in accordance with the election referenda policies and bylaws set out by the SFSS. Breaches said regulation may be escalated to the IEC. Be it further resolved to add NP 3.3a to read as 3.3a. As per SFSS bylaw 13 subsection 3, elected candidates cannot hold department union DSU, faculty union FSU, constituency group CG, or club executive seats concurrently to their executive committee term. Be it lastly resolved to strike board of directors in NP 3.6 and replace it with executive committee. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. Opening it up the floor for discussion. If there isn't any, I can offer some background given I'm a submitter of the motion. We have had issues in regards to missing language for NP3, which was removed in November 2020. That is in regards to ensuring that executive officers are not holding both an SFSS executive officer seat as well as a DSU, FSU, or other groups executive seat. It should be noted that this is still something that's in the IEC forms when you nominate yourself to become an executive officer, but we actually don't really have much policy in place to safeguard that. We do have bylaw 13 subsection 3 that kind of does stipulate this, but the language of it is kind of unclear, and that should be something we most likely will be changing in the AGM. In the meantime, I am strongly recommending governance committee to recommend to council to add this policy back into election and referenda to ensure that when people are running for executive committee, they are not in a position where they will be keeping their DSU executive seat, which, with any moral or ethical implications aside, should be a serious no-no on our end. But I'm going to hand the floor over to Abby. Go ahead.
I'm not going to say too much. Pretty much concur with everything you said. There's a huge potential conflict of interest if someone stays with their departmental student union while they're also in a board of director position. It's power imbalance. It's just not a good idea in general. So I'm very much in favor of this recommendation to council.
Okay, next person on the list is Ben. Go ahead.
I am in favor of the change. I am now wondering, with the increased affiliated student group presence on council, do we want to add that executives can't sit as an executive of an affiliated student group as well?
I mean, I'm just trying to think which one of those would be. That would be Students Athletes Advisory,
Resident Hall.
Residence Hall, Embark, TSSU, SFBerg. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not against it. I don't mind. Sure. Will that be a formal amendment then?
Sure, I'll offer that as a formal amendment to just add on affiliated student group in brackets ASG to the list of things you have here.
Okay, so I suggest we add the ASGs right after constituency groups. So, okay, he moves, I will second. So the amendment would basically be, as per SFSS bylaw 13, elected candidates cannot hold department, student union, DSU, faculty, student union, FSU, constituency group, CG, affiliated student group, ASG, or club executive seats concurrently to their SFSS executive terms. So since it's moved, seconded, opening up the floor for discussion. Any thoughts on the amendment? Seeing none, I will move to a vote, seeking unanimous consent on the amendment. If you dissent, please raise your hand or list in the chat. Seeing none, the amendment carries, so we will be moving back to the main motion, which now is the same, just adds in the ASG. Please don't make me reread it again. So any more discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I will be taking this to a vote. Seeking unanimous consent on motion 9.2. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand. Seeing none, that is carried. All right. As amended, yes, it's carried as amended. Thank you, Abby. Okay, so let's move on to 9.3, recommendations to council, again submitted by myself, which reads, be it resolved that governance committee formally recommends to council the adoption of the following changes to NP4, which is NP4 documentation update, whereas there are incorrect references to relevant referenda documents in NP4. Be it resolved to strike word candidate from NP 4.8a and replace it with referendum submission. Be it further resolved to strike nomination from NP 4.a subsection 2 and replace it with SFSS referenda question submission package. I will move. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. Opening up the floor for discussion. I can just offer some context. I was going through this and I saw that they were referencing the wrong packages. To submit a referenda, you need to submit different kind of forms. And I think that was the last board's wrong copy and pasting that happened there. So we should probably update that to make sure people who actually do want to submit a referenda do it right and submit the right forms. But that's pretty much all there is to it. Anybody have any questions, concerns, thoughts? Seeing none, I will be moving this to a vote. Seeking unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand. Seeing none, that also carries. We are moving on to 9.4, recommendation to council, ERPP1. Submitted again by myself. Be it resolved that governance committee formally recommends to council to adopt the following changes to ERPP1. And the motion is super long, so bear with me. So be it resolved to strike references to bylaw 15 subsection 11, 15 subsection 3, and 15 subsection 22 in ERPP1 policy and replace it with bylaw 13, 13 subsection 11, subsection 13, and subsection 23. Be it resolved to further strike reference to bylaw 16 in ERPP policy, in quotation marks, executive committee by elections and referenda must be completed by the end of the 10th week of the summer and or fall semester, including 3 periods, nomination period, campaigning period, and voting period in accordance to bylaw 16, subsection 3. Executive committee by elections and referenda also require at least 2 weeks of pre-election or pre-referenda planning and 2 weeks of post-election or post-referenda reporting. Be further resolved to replace it with executive committee elections and referenda must be completed by the end of the 10th week of the summer and fall semester, including 3 periods, a nomination period, campaigning period, and voting period in accordance to bylaw 14, subsection 3 through 8, which is the change. Executive committee by elections and referenda must also require at least 2 weeks of pre-election or pre-referenda planning and 2 weeks of post-election and post-referenda reporting. Be it further resolved to strike references to bylaw 17 in ERPP1 policy. This section does not limit the time by which the referenda can be conducted if it is a special resolution to impeach a councillor or executive officer, whereby impeachment may be called at any time in the semester within 30 days of notice. A member notice following a member petition or a vote of council in accordance with bylaw 17. Be further resolved to replace this with, this section does not limit the time by which the referenda can be conducted if it is a special resolution to the impeachment of a councillor or executive officer, whereby impeachment may be called at any time of the semester within 30 days notice following a member's petition or a vote of council in accordance with bylaw 15. Be it lastly resolved to strike references to bylaw 16 subsection 3 in ERP 1.8 and replace it with bylaw 14.3. All right, I will move this. Can I get a second? Math seconds. I will open up the floor for discussion on this one. Just for context, we're just fixing the bylaw references in it because those are messed up. And if we're not referencing the wrong bylaw, I don't know how this would be done. And it is, Ben, for the record, it is in the attachment section. but I am for team transparency here, so we're putting the whole thing in the motion. Okay. Any questions, thoughts, concerns? Seeing none, I will move this to a vote, seeking unanimous consent. If you dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that's carried unanimously. We are moving on to, we're going through these really quickly. We're going on to 9.5, recommendation to council, ERPP2. Submitted by myself again. Be it resolved, the governance committee formally recommend to council to adopt the following changes to ERPP2. ERPP2 language change, language update. Be it resolved to strike VP Finance from ERPP 2.3 and replace the VP Finance and Services. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. Opening the floor for discussion. The only thing we're changing is just making sure that we're referencing VP Finance and Services, not VP Finance, because VP Finance no longer exists. We only have VP Finance and Services. Seeing that there's no discussion on this, I will move us to a vote. Seeking unanimous consent. If you dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carries unanimously. We will be moving on to item 9.6, constituency group and affiliate student group censure policy change, submitted by mathematics counselor. It reads, whereas constituency groups and affiliate student group representatives currently do not have membership in any faculty caucus, whereas this causes issues for these representatives if they were ever to be censured for a breach of confidence, as unlike student union representatives, they would then begin to lose a portion of their stipend as outlined in our 4.16a, whereas this should be changed so that a censure for a breach of confidence would have a consistent effect on a non-executive counselor, no matter the nature of the group that they represent. Be it resolved, the governance committee recommend to council to adopt a policy amendment outlining attachment document censure policy correction. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. Open the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
Just to provide a bit of context for this, currently, the way the censure policy amendments were written, it was based on the fact that non-executive counselors currently sit in a faculty caucus, but that's not true for constituency group and affiliated student group representatives. So this is just making it all nice and consistent.
Okay. Go ahead, Abby.
Sorry, just to clarify, Ben, the reason constituency groups need to be like the regular, holy cow, okay, English, let's go. The reason other counselors are covered under the censure policy is that they have a faculty caucus to sit on, as being censured for a confidence breach takes away your ability to sit on regular committees. This basically would just ensure that constituency group members and affiliated student group members wouldn't have to resign from council if they're censured from due to confidentiality. Is that right?
There's a list in the chat from Ben. Go ahead.
More so that they wouldn't have to take a stipend deduction for not sitting on a committee, but in essence, yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, seeing none, I will be moving us to vote. Seeking unanimous consent. If you dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, this is carried unanimously. We can move on to item 9.7, recommendation to council work report updates submitted by mathematics counselor. It reads, whereas our 4.6 of council policies was amended on June 30th, 2021 to transition the SFSS to a monthly work report submission for non-executive counselors rather than a bi-weekly submission, whereas this amendment was incorrectly worded as our 4.6 referred to the submission deadline for semester reports rather than the submission deadline for work reports, whereas this requires correction to ensure that we are operating on clear sets of policies under R4. Be it resolved that governance committee recommends to council to adopt the following policy amendments outlining attachment work report deadlines correction. I will move. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. Opening the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
Basically, to summarize, the old board mistakenly overrode the section for the deadline on semester reports and didn't correctly amend the right section. So this is just striking what went wrong and replacing it with what standard practice is currently, which is that non-executive counselors submit monthly work reports and executives do indeed have to submit semester reports.
Okay. Any questions? Comments? No. Okay. Seeing none, I will move us to a vote. Seeking unanimous consent, if you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carries unanimously. We can move on to item 9.8, recommendation to council R4 housekeeping updates submitted by mathematics counselor. Whereas there are several minor typos and consistency issues in R4 of council policies, whereas these minor issues should be corrected to ensure that clarity of R4, be it resolved that the governance committee recommends to council to adopt the following policy amendments outlined in the attachment document R4 housekeeping changes. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. Opening the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
Just to summarize what these changes are, first thing under R4.11A, it says that the stipend of an exec will be reduced by 100 where they fail to attend a council or committee meeting without approved regrets. But for a non-exec, it doesn't say without approved regrets, so it's just adding that to be consistent. Under R4.14, it talks about your stipend being reduced when you arrive late at a committee meeting, but the actual policy refers to council meetings and not committee meetings. And in R4.16, it just says the stipend of a will, and it's clearly referring to non-executive counselors, so it's just adding that in.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, lingering thoughts? Okay, seeing none, I will move us to a vote. Seeking unanimous consent, if you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carries. Okay, moving on to 9.9, recommendation to council R14.15 subsection A updates. Submitted by mathematics counselor. Whereas R4.15A is currently ambiguous in its application, whereas R14.15A should be clarified to ensure that it is clearly worded and can be applied consistently if necessary without any ambiguity about its meaning. Be it resolved that governance committee recommends to council to adopt the following policy amendments outlining the attachment document executive officers committee clarification. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. I will open the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
Just to clarify what these changes are currently, our 4.15A reads as follows: the stipend of an exec officer will be reduced by $200 where they are not named to at least 2 committees and $100 where they are not named to 1 committee. This is, in my mind, worded a bit unclearly, so I'm just suggesting that we reword it to the stipend of an executive officer will be reduced by 200 where they are named to 0 committees and by 100 where they are named to 1 committee, just to make that clear.
Okay. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, I will move us to a vote. Seeking unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carries. All right, moving on to our next item, which will be 9.10 as amended onto the agenda. Title of it is Recommendation to Council, CRAI Terms of Reference. It reads, be resolved that Governance Committee formally recommends to Council to adopt the following changes to the CRIA Terms of Reference outlined in the appendix of the SFSS election or referendum policies. housekeeping changes to the terms of reference to the references to the committee for the recommended appointment of IEC CRA, whereas the terms of reference for the CRIA currently contains several minor typos, whereas the proposed listed in the terms of reference for the CRIA is currently inaccurate. Be it resolved to amend the purpose section of the CRIA terms of reference by striking it and replacing it with the purpose of this committee is to interview candidates for the IEC commissioner position and make a recommendation to council for the appointment of the candidates to the IEC. Be it further resolved to amend the deliverables sections in CRIA terms of reference by striking all occurrences of the word board and replacing it with council. Be it further resolved to amend the first sentence of the section communications in the CRIA terms of reference by striking the word in person. Be it further resolved to amend the second bullet point in the section relevant bylaws and policies in the CRIA terms of reference by striking it and replacing it with SFSS election and referenda policies. Ooh, okay, that's a mouthful. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds, opening the floor for discussion. Go ahead then.
Just to explain these changes, so for the first thing, CRAI recommends the appointment of the entire IEC to council. Currently, the purpose says it only recommends the appointment of the chief commissioner. For the second thing, we make reference to board in its terms of reference repeatedly. Board is now called council. Third, in terms of how it can meet, committees can meet virtually now. That's a thing we can do. And for the fourth one, we just say elections and referenda policies, but to be consistent, it should say SFSS, elections and referenda policies.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, I will move us to a vote seeking unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carries. We can now move on to 9.11, titled Recommendation to Council IEC 9. And it reads, be it resolved that Governance Committee formally recommends to Council to adopt the following changes to IEC 9. Procedural changes to IEC 9, additional election support. Whereas IEC 9 has procedural issues or omissions that result in either lack of clarity on certain procedures or procedures that are inconsistent with the SFSS bylaws, whereas these procedures outlined under IEC 9 should be corrected so they can be unambiguously understood and consistently applied in the future if deemed necessary. Be it resolved to amend IEC 9.5 by striking the word may and replacing it with shall. Be it resolved to amend IEC 9.6 by striking it and replacing it with 9.6. The IEC can verify that elections of the counselor in question is in line with society's bylaws and society's regulations. If the IEC commissioner of the chief commissioner of the IEC believes that the non-executive council election in question is unverifiable, this must be communicated to the chair of council, and council may order by a 2/3 majority vote that a re-election for the position takes place. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. Opening the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
So to clarify these two changes, for the first change, 9.5 says that non-executive council elections may be run in accordance with bylaw, that running them in accordance with bylaw is not an option. It should say that they shall be run in accordance with bylaw. For 9.6, currently the wording just says that if the chief commissioner believes the non-executive council election in question is unverifiable, this has to be communicated to the chair of council, and council may order that a re-election for that position takes place. I'm just suggesting for clarity that we say that council has to do so by a 2/3 majority vote.
Okay. Abby, you're on the list. Go ahead.
Sorry, I don't know if there's a definition for this or not, but is there any, like, what does unverifiable mean? Like, technically, if someone just takes really bad meeting minutes and they have their election, that could be seen as unverifiable. Or if it's like a 1 vote difference, and like I'm just not sure what unverifiable means. So I think it might be worthwhile to define that.
I'm next on the list, and I can offer a response to that. When councillors are elected in, member services does require councillors to submit the meeting minutes where the election result was ratified, as well as their name and their email and such of SFU. So technically it is verifiable on our end. It is requiring, however, groups to do this properly and actually do ratify their election results, which has been communicated to them earlier this year. And hopefully they will actually do it.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Any further comments? Seeing none, I will move us to a vote seeking unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carries. All right, moving on to the last one, which is 9.12, which is recommendation to council changes to R9 and SO22 submitted by myself. It reads, be it resolved that governance committee formally recommends to council to immediately adopt the following changes to R9 at a council meeting via suspension of PM 1.2D. Be it resolved to strike R9.3 and replace it with only members of council and invited third parties who may be required for the specific discussion shall remain in camera session. Be it further resolved to add a new section to R9.5 that reads, 9.5 in-camera discussion cannot be disclosed to directors who were not present in the in-camera session. Subsection A, notwithstanding, in-camera sessions may be disclosed to investigatory committees in which investigations pertaining to the breaches of fiduciary duties. The investigatory committee may only use said information within the scope of the investigation. Subsection B, for the purpose of R9.5A, investigatory committee shall be the Committee on Council Breaches of Confidence as outlined in SO22. Be it further resolved to amend SO22 CCBC by striking SO22.11 and replacing it with the committee shall report to council on the status of its investigation at each meeting of council. Be further resolved to renumber the policy accordingly. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. Opening the floor for discussion. Go ahead then.
I'd like to amend the motion by striking R9 in the first be it resolved clause and replacing with R9 and SO22.
Okay. Ben moves. Can I get a second on that amendment?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. All right, I will move the amendment to a vote. Seeking unanimous consent if you wish to dissent. Please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. For context, the amendment is to strike 9.3 and just say R9 and SO22, correct, Ben?
Yeah, just because we're also recommending a change to SO22.
Okay. Seeking unanimous consent if you wish to dissent, please indicate. Seeing none. I consider that as carried unanimously. So moving back to the main motion, which basically reads the same. Please don't make me reread it again. But the change in the second be it resolved clause, it's as be it resolved to first be it resolved clause. My apologies. First be it resolved clause, to strike R9 and just say R9 and SO22. Okay, I hope that's clear. Sorry, Anne, if it's not. I will tentatively move us to a vote. Seeking unanimous consent, if you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carries unanimously. Well, as amended, my apologies. Okay, as amended. Okay, so that brings a conclusion to our new business today. We will be moving on to our discussion items. The first discussion item is 10.1 electronic voting. We are returning to this, and the blurb on it basically reads, review of briefing note and suggestions on implementing it and taking it to council as a discussion item. So everyone here got the briefing note completed by BD and Angel in regards to our situation with electronic voting. As a reminder, we do not have electronic voting currently, and it is causing us some significant lag in regards to how quickly we can do committee elections, for example. So I really hope folks had a time to review that briefing note I sent out. Can I get, by a show of thumbs up, those who reviewed it? Given that majority of the committee has reviewed the briefing note in question, I do want us to briefly discuss it in regards to what we're thinking about how we can go about it and implementing it. I do want to highlight one thing, and that's, again, comes back to the fact that we do not have electronic voting in our bylaws, which does, in a way, limit as to how far we can go. I do, however, believe that we can do a policy patch in the meantime in order to at least have something going on and not have to do those chat votes ever again. So as a background, I did reach out to the student union, who apparently has something similar to this. They have not responded, and I'm not particularly surprised given our differing governance model, let's put it that way. So I did want to give the floor and just have folks comment on their thoughts on this, so I don't talk the entire time. Go ahead, Ben.
So I took a look at the briefing note and the various platforms were suggested. Personally, it seems like Election Buddy would better work in like meetings and stuff, because it seems as though simply voting is more of a platform for elections themselves and not for like in-meeting voting. I know they have some stuff for like convention type meetings, but really council isn't that.
Yeah, I agree. There does appear to be a function to it where people can vote in meetings via Zoom. Go ahead, Abby.
I concur with Ben. I think Election Buddy is the best because it's free. You know, from a VP finance perspective, I certainly like free software. And then obviously there are the more premium versions, because I assume we're going to have more than 20 voters. But I think I like that option, and I agree. We need something in the interim for whatever reason. If it's snow, if whatever's happening and we can't get to campus for a meeting, or if we continue to do meetings in hybrid, we need some kind of online voting software. So yeah.
I see Ben has a direct response, but he retracted, and I have a feeling I know why. So I don't know how to break this to the VP Finance. But the plan that we would need is paid.
I realized that mid-sentence. I realized that mid-sentence, so
It's
pardon me on
not-
that.
It's not deadly the amount we need to pay, but I did want to note for the sake of transparency and making sure if anybody watches these recordings, this is actually not free. The plan version that we need is not free. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, I just wanted to voice that. Go ahead, Ben.
I guess we'd need what, plus or premium?
Yeah. Go ahead, Abby.
I guess this goes without saying, but if we could find a way to make plus work, that'd be great.
Noted. Go ahead, Ben.
Sorry, is the cost outlined here? Is this per what time frame?
If I recall correctly, it's monthly. Which I think is why our VP Finance is getting woozy a bit.
I will, if it was $100 for the year and that was the difference, I probably wouldn't be crapping myself so much, but like $90 per month adds up pretty fast for those of you who can do basic multiplication. So yeah.
So I'm just based on like the stats of it, I'm pretty sure we can go with the plus because I think that's fine. I don't necessarily think that we need to I don't believe we need two-factor authentication. I'm just gonna put it out there. Go ahead, Ben.
I see one potential problem with the plus. It only allows for 10 motions per meeting. And most council meetings traditionally have more than 10 motions.
Go ahead, Abby.
I was gonna say, I think we don't have, if we're trying to pass something by unanimous consent, maybe that's a way to get around it, because not all 10 motions necessarily have to be contested. So if a motion's not contested, perhaps we don't have to use the software for that motion.
Given that I just unilaterally placed myself on the list, I can definitely add to that. The point of this is to reduce the agony, quite frankly, that comes with having to do a roll call vote, which is not great. So if we can pass things by unanimous consent, that would be that we would not need this software for that. In the case that we are doing something that is going to be contested or will be strenuous, that's where I most likely would be using this software. And hopefully there's no more than 10 motions on the agenda where we have to use it. If there is, then we are doing our jobs wrong. Yeah. And depending on the plan's terms, I think if it doesn't work out, we can always cancel it and go back to the drawing board. But yeah. Anybody else have any other thoughts? Yes, go ahead, Abby.
Just want to throw in there for the plus section. I think the SMS notice is totally unnecessary. It said it's an additional $29. I don't think we did text counselors for every vote. That's not needed. So we don't need to spend that money, just for clarification.
The text message notices include under PAP Plus.
It says additional $29 add-on.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we do not want that. I don't think councilors want us texting them. Go ahead, Ben.
That is for the election vote plan, not for the meeting vote plan, to note.
It is under the meeting vote plan. It says SMSS notice in brackets and an asterisk, additional 29 add-on.
Am I looking at the wrong site? Because I'm looking at it and I don't see it as an additional add-on for meeting.
It's page 3 of the briefing note. Okay. Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts? If there are none, we will be coming back, and hopefully by next meeting, I can give you guys an update on whether we can push for recommendation for council to amend policy and include this. In the meantime, again, thank you for being an angel for putting this together and doing the research legwork on this, because yeah, that's a lot of stuff. So I can move us along to 10.2, which is policy review check-in. So I have notified everyone in this committee last week that we are moving along on our review plan, and we are currently reviewing member services group policies and council policies in accordance to the governance annual plan, where we are sticking to the policies that need the most updates and changes. My goal personally is for us to decide within the next coming days as to which ones are ready to be signed off on and which ones are in dire need of updating. So I do want to give folks a heads up that we have unfortunately not completed the not every policy that was supposed to be reviewed by the end of today has been reviewed. My apologies for that. That's probably because I didn't remind people in time or enough. So as of right now, in terms of our document, it does look like, just speaking for council policies, there's an action required for literally every review that has been completed, which from what I can tell is majority. So I can speak to a couple of them that I have reviewed, and I think we can just go around and have folks speak to the policy they have completed and reviewed to see, get an idea as to what, to how much are we spamming the council agenda in the coming weeks to basically fix what is very, very much so broken. Given the fact that we just passed the recommendation for R9, I can start with that. I know it's kind of out of order, but I think it makes the most sense at this point. So R9 is our in-camera sessions policy under council policies. So folks that do not know this, because this is cute information that I guess no one really tells you, we do not have bylaw in regards to in-camera, and there's nothing really in the Societies Act either in regards to how in-camera sessions really work. So in that regard, we're kind of flying blind. So my suggestion was we definitely keep the sections that are in regards to what should be kept in camera, so we don't run into issues with contracts, legal, or the collective agreement, to be frank, or PIPA. So I think those items should be staying. The only update I recommend that we have and that we just voted on was in regards to updating 9.3, because it currently reads only members of council and its committees and invited third parties may be required, shall remain in the meeting. First off, a couple things are wrong here. Firstly is council and its committees. We have committees that have member at larges. They're not directors. I do not want those folks being brought into in-camera sessions because in-camera matters only pertain to HR, legal, contracts, and PIPA. They have, quite frankly, no business in being in those in-camera sessions. Another issue is, quite frankly, support staff. We love our support staff, but they're not directors, so they probably should not know what's being discussed in camera. And technically, they're committee members. While non-voting, they're still committee members. That's also something to keep in mind. And then this is just me being super nitpicky towards the end. It's in regards to shall remaining in the meeting. I don't think people should be kicked out of the meeting, quite frankly, especially for holding online meetings. I think what we do currently, moving into a Zoom room separate from the main room, is the best course of action, because not the entire meeting should be conducted in camera, because that's a little bit questionable. So it should be an option where like folks who are not entitled for in-camera information to still remain in the meeting. And currently, as this policy stands, it kind of suggests that they need to leave the meeting. And to the best of my understanding, the only situation where folks would be required to leave the meeting would be when they declare a conflict. So I don't believe just because of an in-camera discussion items, folks should be kicked from the meeting. I think just adding in language that just says they are not entitled to being in the in-camera session is good enough, which is the recommendation which is passed. Just to ensure that we're not putting people out of meetings, personally. But that's the main update that I would have for R9 in regards to R8. Oh, R8 is a doozy one for me. Firstly, there is a reference to the wrong bylaw. It shouldn't be bylaw 17 subsection 7. It should be bylaw 15 subsection 7. Another thing that I personally did not really like is in regards to the appointment of alternates, or how that goes about. We have not had an issue with this yet, but given that like it might be down the road, I did think maybe adding in language about this until we can push for a bylaw amendment would be useful. Which basically says, as per the membership definition of the SFSS Constitution, any and all alternate counselors must be in good standing in the society and must be an undergraduate student at SFU. I think that's important because in our bylaws, we do have associate members who may choose to be part of the SFSS, but they're not necessarily SFU students. So we want to specify that we want undergrad from SFU, not from Langara, not from Capilano, SFU. No wiggling your way out of that one. Yeah, that's just my personal take. And in regards to 8.3, this is just something that's really been bothering me for the past year, and I think it's worthwhile adding into policy, which is a 8.3 subsection A that reads: the appointment of alternate counselors must be communicated to the VP Internal Organizational Development prior to the alternate's attendance at the council meeting. And then that's mostly to ensure that people know who the alternate is coming in, and to make sure that there aren't individuals coming into the council meeting claiming to be an alternate when they're not. We do have it in policy that if a counselor is sending an alternate, they need to tell the chair who the alternate is. However, that's something that's not really being adhered to, which is not great. So just ensuring that we don't have this issue. I also think a subsection would be useful that basically just says that groups shall provide the alternates, or alternates plural, full name, student number, and student email. Again, that just helps us to verify that they're a legitimate student. and in good standing with us, and also just helps us like double check to make sure we don't have people coming in who are actually not legitimate alternates. Yeah, that's basically it. And then in the bottom of the page, again, wrong reference to policy, so that probably should be changed as well. What else worthwhile mentioning? Arguably, they all are worthwhile, but for R3, it's just basic housekeeping. We have missing spaces. We have something that's misnumbered. And then we have weird spelling situations. So basically under exit reports, it just says isn't when I should say are not, because it should be plural and it should be properly phrased, not abbreviated. So that's basically everything that's wrong with R3. It's not anything crazy. For R13 and R14, I uploaded the wrong policy, but the only update I would suggest for R14 is just adding in just better language in regards to who we can hire for who we can hire for society. We do have policy in place currently that you cannot be hired by the society for 2 years if you were a counselor. That is to mainly safeguard that we don't have lingering people. There's some kind of checks and balances in that regard. The potential amendment I would be proposing is basically reading into 14.1 subsection A that just reads, this provision includes but is not limited to any form of training or workshop provided for the society, the use of independent contractors consulting, or any way in which individuals would be financially reimbursed from society funds. So again, this is just to limit that we're not putting ourselves in a position where we're breaching our own policies and not setting dangerous precedents where counselors are coming back again and again and getting paid for potential things that they should not be getting paid for. For R13, the only thing is that there's a missing space, which is good. That's literally the only issue I had with it. So for SO1, which basically outlines the ending and ad hoc committees and all that, we have a numbering issue and the space issue. And I suggest that we add a new section. So if you look at SO1, there's actually something kind of wrong with it. So it goes from 1.11 to 1.13. So we could do a couple things here. We could renumber them, and that would take a long time. Or I propose we add in a new 1.12 that basically would just read, whereby the chair of the committee is not defined in the composition of standing order of the committee, the president will be tasked with calling the first meeting of the committee, where the chair must be elected. So that's my recommendation, what we add in, so we don't have to renumber. And also to fix an issue, which is a pretty concerning one, we have committees that do not have designated chairs by default, and that makes it very difficult as in regards to how committees can meet and how they can actually be calling meetings, because technically there is nothing really in bylaw or in policy in regards to who calls that meeting then. There is provisions in bylaw under the president's rule that they can convene council and exec committee, but it has become a standing tradition that the president calls these committee meetings for the first one to elect a chair. Now that's practice, but we do not have it in policy, so I suggest we slot it in before anyone notices. But yeah, that's basically for SO1. For SO5, that's us, governance committee. I don't think anything super big has to be changed. There's again the wrong reference to bylaw. Instead of bylaw 4, I should be referencing bylaw 7. And then the only amendment I would suggest we add is under 5.3a, add in something along the lines of any and all society policy shall be referred to governance committee for review before taken to council or adoption. We do have in the policy manual that policy has to be recommended to governance committee or relevant committee. I suggest we suggest to council that they just run it past us before they take anything to council, given the fact that that policy in the policy manual has been breached numerous times last year and numerous policy passed without going through any committee for what I know. So maybe we want to be a little bit more restrictive in regards to what we adopt as policy. And maybe that's something worthwhile looking into. I do wonder whether we can actually do that without touching PM. Not sure what number it is, but the policy manual. Yeah. Oh, also, this was pointed out to me over the weekend. Our standing ordered are wrongly numbered. We do not have an SO4. We just go from SO3 to SO5. Yeah, not great. In other news, average committee is supposed to be SO13. So there's gonna be a lot of renumbering going on. I'd like to apologize in advance to BD. I'm sorry, BD. But I think those are the main ones for me, I think Ben did a couple. Sorry, BD, go ahead.
Yeah, I think those are the main ones. I just added the accessibility one.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I think Ben also submitted a few. Would you like to do a brief overview, Ben? Yeah, go ahead.
Not sure how brief this is going to be, but so big things that are needing to be changed across multiple policies. Pretty much every single policy adoption date and previous revision date is completely incorrect. In R2 and in SO something or another, I forget the exact standing order. The title in the policy is not the title in the heading, so that needs to be changed for consistency. In sort of other things that have come up, R2 just needs to be reconciled because it is just largely wrong in terms of how we do things normally these days with monthly work reports for non-executive counselors. R7, we need to strike a few things about the consent agenda and change a few things there, as that outlines a procedure for the consent agenda that has never been followed by the council or executive committee in this term or the last one, to my understanding. In R10, we need to strike some words and put some other things in R10 as to how minutes are taken, because R10 doesn't reflect how minutes are taken for committees. Also, R12, in R12, the definition for regulation in R12 is inconsistent with the definition for regulation in bylaw, which should be changed. One question I did have for the VP Finance was whether we have budgeted for a $600 transportation allowance for counselors. I suspect we haven't. And so R15 may need to be looked at if we haven't. For the standing orders, again, the policy adoption dates and policy revision dates are largely incorrect. They're just for SO2. just some references to each director that need to be changed to each member of council. There's one place where it says in camera where there needs to be a dash, needs to be a space added, stuff like that. SO3 in the executive committee, bylaws that are referenced are just wrong. And it outlines that the exec should meet weekly, which doesn't happen. The HRP document is completely outdated, and there were significant changes made on January 18th, 2022 that aren't reflected in the document at all. Those do fix a lot of issues. First year engagement committees, nothing much other than the adoption dates. Oversight on exec officers, you just need to make sure that the motion that was passed on November 24th is reflected. Space oversight, there's a lot of problems with. First of all, the formatting needs to be totally changed, as that's wrong. There's also bylaw referencing that needs to be changed. The title of the policy is different than the title of the heading, which needs to be edited. There needs to be a few minor punctuation things changed. We need to remove the 10th point of the composition section, as that's just empty. We have the word constraints spelled as constrains. And there's also subcommittees that, to my understanding, have never met. SO19 for nominating committee, nothing much, just the adoption dates. SO21, which is faculty caucuses, just the same stuff. The stuff that I just already filed the motion for earlier today to correct the things for constituency groups. And for the member services policies, for the food bank policy, nothing much, just striking the word SFU and fixing an indenting issue here and there. MGP 4 for faculty and departmental student unions, just striking the word the in a few places before council. Change VP finance to finance and services. Also, we need to figure out what this policy is, because it seems like we're making reference to a policy that doesn't exist. And for MGP 6, I think a further discussion needs to be had there to see how MGP 6 interacts with bylaw 6.8. That was the brief summary of my reviews.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I always love hearing that we're violating our own policies. It's always fun. Okay. Anybody else have anything else? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Abby.
So two things. I'll start with just to clarify what Ben said. Yes, we do not have any money allocated for travel for counselors. As far as the policy review itself goes, I apologize, mine aren't in yet. They're almost done. But the majority of mine didn't have any major issues, just grammatical issues. I checked all the bylaws and they actually linked the way they were supposed to, which was great. Yeah, for the most part, fairly unproblematic compared to last time. So that was a nice little change. But I'm still going to do a final run through. So if I find anything, I'll let you guys know and I'll submit it within the policy review.
Okay, so sorry, I have a midterm tomorrow, so my brain is fried. But I suggest that maybe on Wednesday or Thursday we regroup and basically just start drafting notices that we want to push through governance before we're pushing it to council. Is this very slow? Yes. Is this the right way of doing it though? It's also a yes, which is unfortunate. Anyway. Oh, actually, let me just double check to make sure BD actually has access to the folder. I'm not sure if she does.
She does.
She does? Okay, good. Okay. So the council policies one should be under council policies, and then the member services, I assume, were uploaded to the member services folder. Okay, so we are still kind of sort of on track to where we should be, so that's good. We can off meeting, regroup, and make sure we have our ducks in a row and make sure you can start pushing notices if you have to. my goal is to for the recommendation to council that we passed today, to send it to communications again on the website so we can add it to the agenda this week for council. I'm sure the president will be very happy with me about that. So yeah. Anything else anybody wants to say on policy check-in before we move on?
Me. Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just, thanks Ben for sharing. I think I didn't have this or I missed it. So, so what I'll be doing to avoid overload of work in our department, I'll just start revising the ones that I'm 100% sure council will approve in terms of space, bylaw numbering. And then the ones that are completely like new policy adoption or new policy change, or like that have serious implication or might attract debates in the council meeting, I'll leave those and just notify those who are involved. So like for the council policy, I'll start with the grammar, the numbering, and check in with Ben once it's ready. And then for the others, even in the council policy, I'll just wait for the proper procedure where you will give me the exact changes, and then I'll revise that and send it to Ilham. The second thing that I wanted to request is, so the members, staff-led policies, I don't know what it's all about. It's kind of strange. I don't know if you're still using it. If we want to look into that, and also accessibility policy, it's kind of urgent because it's in the in our website and it looks really different. So if we want to work on that, is just renumbering, suggest how we should renumber it and put it in our policy template. I already shared those, the two of the policy template and accessibility policy. Thank you. That's all for me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Beauty. Yeah, I think we will have, unfortunately, a lot of work for your department. Sorry about that. Yeah, staff-led policies is something else. I read it too, and I was really confused as to what it was. It is definitely something we should probably check in with in regards when we're consulting on it with our events coordinator and most likely the building coordinators as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Any more discussion on this item before we move on? Okay, I'm assuming that's a no, so we can, I guess, move on to the next item, which is bylaw review. That's gonna be fun. So I'm gonna just pull that up because it's easier that way. But I'm gonna just pull up our bylaws and just go over it real quickly because I wanted to give everyone a fair shot of seeing the extent of work we're getting ourselves into. So it is now end of June, which means, even though it sounds insane to say, our annual general meeting is basically knocking on our door, meaning if there's any bylaw changes we want to push through, this is the time to do so and make sure that we have everything in line and ready to recommend to council and all that. So there's a couple of things. Just right off the bat, we have 25 bylaws, meaning that should be around, I think, 5 bylaw per person here to review. So it's not going to be a super intensive, like, you must review 10 or 15 bylaws individually. Luckily for us, we only have 25. So I'll do a quick walkthrough for those who are not super familiar with our bylaws, because before you sign up for reviewing one, you probably want to know what you're reviewing. So we can just start off with obviously number one, which is bylaw 1, is interpretation. So this basically outlines all the definitions in which we operate by, from anything, it's alphabetical, from anything from acting officer to all the way down till university and what it's referring to. So there are a couple things I think worthwhile looking into as to how we're defining what. I do think there is room that will most likely impact bylaw 1 as well, room to redefining what our membership is that is more consistent with our constitution, along the lines of just making sure that our activities as the SFSS are being coordinated when it comes to students by current students who are in good standing. That's something that has been an issue for the past year, where we had folks involved in our business who were no longer or never were part of the SFSS. So I do think that kind of restriction is necessary to ensure that we don't have any abuse of power going on. So definition section basically for bylaw 1. Bylaw 2 defines membership. So we currently have 2 kinds of members: registered members, which is, I believe, everybody in this room, is the students who are in good standing with us, who are going to SFU, who are taking classes, paid their fees, paid their dues. And then we have the associate members who are not necessarily SFU students, but they are students in other colleges or institutions who pay their society fees. And because of that, there's a whole thing that I don't think this clause was ever used. I might be wrong, but I don't think it was. So I think looking at it closer and seeing what this really is like and whether we actually want something like this is, I believe, up to debate. So bylaw 2 is membership definitions. Bylaw 3 is just very basic. It just basically outlines the powers basically members of the society hold and how that works. Clearly, it's very well defined. We have one singular line for it. Anyway, moving on. Bylaw 4 outline members' meetings. So these are special general meetings as well as annual general meetings. So these are the 2 members' meetings recognized by our bylaws. And I believe by Societies Act as well. I think so, yes. So we have an outline for the AGM. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, I want to say. And then we have something outlined special general meetings and when they would be used. In other sections of the bylaw, does outline when special AGMs would be used. Yeah. And then just outlines notice time, how it should go out in terms of notice, and actually what to do if you accidentally messed up and you didn't give notice to some group. So yeah, also quorum. I have issues with the quorum number personally. I do think quorum number should be increased, to be frank. I don't think it should be only 250. I think that's not representative of 30,000 students, not even close. I do think quorum number should be increased, and I don't know if council will approve of that, but I do think that's something worthwhile maybe bringing up to the AGM, increasing quorum numbers just to make sure that the decisions made at special general meetings and annual general meetings is actually more representative as to what the students want. If you're a student politician, it's not that hard to whip up 250 people to basically vote whichever way you want. So something worthwhile considering. So bylaw 5 outlines the composition of council, who's on it, or how that works. It's nothing special. I think the only aspect worthwhile looking at is in regards to affiliate student groups, because we will have more of them coming in to council. I guess, because they're reactivating or taking their established seats that passed on the April 27th meeting. Bylaw 6 is in regards to the obligations of council and the power council holds. As a little backdrop, council basically holds all the power. That's basically the bottom line here. Executive committee really cannot exist without council. Basically, yeah, executive committee kind of sort of just reports to council and holds the powers of council between council meetings, but ultimately council can make decisions that executive committee quite frankly cannot. So if we want to, depending on what we want to go about here, whether we want to give more power to council and just make executive a bit less, make executive more dependent on council, I think that's worthwhile looking into. There has been the past couple years questionable decisions made by the executive, and council just kind of have to sit there and watch. So maybe looking into making sure that doesn't happen anymore is worthwhile. Obviously, we cannot shift that in policy only, especially if it outlines the opposite in bylaw. So that's something to keep in mind. It's pretty long. If you take this bylaw, it's going to be a longer one than the usual ones. Same with bylaw 7, which is basically the powers and obligations of the executive committee. It outlines people's roles, what's in their portfolio, et cetera, et cetera. That's something to keep in mind. It does outline the limitations that is placed on the executive committee, which you will notice kind of coincide with what council can do. Like, for example, we can't approve expenditures more than 5K through executive committee, but council can. We cannot enter into multi-year contracts through executive committee, but council can. So these are the checks and balances between the powers executive committee and council. Worthwhile reviewing. Yeah. If you want to review people's roles as well, it's also something we can do. I do believe that some of the roles are more dubious as to who's doing what. So I do think there would be worthwhile like clarifying the roles of certain vice presidents that quite frankly are necessities to society's function. President's role is pretty in between. They can liaison between different vice presidents, but I do think, speaking for myself, that my role is not super clear as to what I'm supposed to be doing other than everything. And then I think VP Finance's role is worthwhile looking at too as well. There are things that quite frankly are pawned up on the VP Finance, but it's not clear what it's supposed to be VP Finance's job. And it's not just in policy, but it's also in practice. So we do want to ensure that like people's portfolios are relatively clear as to who does what and when. Otherwise, we are looking at like massive delays, inconsistencies as to what you're supposed to be doing and what you're not supposed to be doing, established practices that do not coincide with bylaw and policy, which could actually get the officer into serious trouble. So clearing those things up, I think, is really worthwhile. I don't think a crazy amount of work would be required on it, but worthwhile looking into. The rest of the roles probably are relatively fine. For student unions, bylaw 8. So this is, we should be looking at like whether if we have to use it, can we actually use it? A lot of our bylaws, when you actually say, okay, I need a manual to tell me what to do, you will notice that that's not really the case. It's ambiguous, it's unclear, and it's up to your judgment. So I think looking at bylaw 8 specifically, given the fact that it talks about recognizing student groups, and et cetera, I think it's important that we look at that and actually ask, is this something that if it comes to it, we can use? I personally would be in the faction of no, I don't think this is clear. And we don't really have much information as to how this process is meant to go to recognize groups and such. So I do think that's worthwhile clarifying if you can. Student union levies issue. A massive one in regards to how that process goes, and honestly the consultation on the end, this union required is an issue. Safeguards as to what to do is an issue. So probably outlining it better in bylaw will help. Honestly, to be frank, like this is something we could probably also fix in policy, because that's also not super clear as to what to do when a student union actually gets a levy, and how that impacts staff and that group's interaction with the SFSS. Bylaw 10, constituency groups. I don't think there's much to do there, to be frank. I think that's pretty okay. Maybe if we can fix some of the language to make it more concise, that's something we can do, but nothing crazy there. Auditors, I can't really speak to that because I am not part of the audit, thank God. But again, making sure the language aligns with actually what happens is useful. Again, unfortunately, there are sometimes things that do not align with practice and in policy and bylaw. So just making sure it's actually achievable and aligned is probably fine. Bylaw 12 amendments, how fitting. So that's something to keep in mind as to how we want to do amendments and how it can be done. So as of now, it does say it has a members meeting or a referendum vote, which is fine. But yeah, just clearing up the language, making it understandable. Let's not need a PhD to understand our own bylaws, which unfortunately is kind of the case, especially if you look at bylaw 13, which is massive. So bylaw 13 outlines our election processes and like how you're eligible to run and all that. This is the bylaw section that I'm referencing in the motions, which I think is kind of problematic, which is bylaw 13.3. Members may not hold office as a voting member on the executive committee and a student union or constituency group. I don't know about you, but I understand what they're trying to get at, but it might not exactly be what they're trying to get at, because there's two interpretations to this. It's either saying you cannot be a general member of a DSU when you're an exec, versus you cannot be a DSU executive and an SFSS executive, which I think is what they were going for. But I can't tell if this is because it's a fragmented sentence or because grammar just disappeared. But this doesn't make sense, and I do think right off the bat this is something that should be fixed at the AGM. Yeah. So super long. I do believe that this bylaw could be condensed a bit because there are a lot of information here that's overlapping with our election referendum policy, which is good. We do want that kind of checks and balances. But at the same time, we do have a massive document just for elections. Like, it's very long. And maybe making a reference in it for that just says, for further information, look at election referendum policies might be useful, especially because that policy can be changed pretty often. In this policy versus bylaw, we just have to wait for a referendum or an AGM. So I do think it'd be worthwhile giving that wiggle room to future boards where if something is really not working with the election process, they can alter it, but also keeping the main components as what needs to happen and how it has to happen in place in bylaw to make sure there's not like an abuse of power in regards to how elections actually take place. But I do think it's a lot of words and a lot of information for a bylaw that is kind of unnecessary. And then bylaw 14, by-elections, how that occurs. It's so a couple things. Council by-elections happen, that's fine. Non-executive councilors often like leave and like other people come in and replace them. That's not a massive issue. Executive committee vacancies is a different thing because that never happened before. Well, it happened towards the end, but in regards to how by-election would be called for that position is a different story. So I do think that it is worthwhile just reviewing that and making sure that's actually clear if God forbid we need to use it. Because as of now, as the person who should be overseeing this process, I'm confused. So that's probably not a good sign. So clearing up how we actually want this process to go and how it actually works might be useful. Oopsies, sorry folks. So yeah, I have a massive axe to grind with this one, so I think I just take this one. But that's bylaw 14. 15 is resignation, impeachment, or abandonment. Anybody who knows me knows that I have a problem with our impeachment policy. Impeached bylaw, my apologies, which is vague and unclear. And quite frankly, I've seen DSUs and FSUs with better impeachment clauses. So also something worthwhile fixing. So referenda, let's just make sure it's doable and it's actually in line with our policies and vice versa. When I reviewed this for election referenda, it seemed to be fine. But yeah, just keep in mind, just make sure we're not making it more difficult than it has to be to submit a referendum question. 17 is mostly in relation to the SFSS staying accountable to external organizations that are quite frankly bigger than us, like the province and country, quite frankly. So that's pretty, nothing to the best of my knowledge is super wrong with that one, though it's not really often used. Bylaw 18 is pretty basic, seal the society. Nothing insane. Bylaw 19 is dissolution. I do think there'd be value in making it more clear as to the process and how that works and what the outcomes of that would be. There is this thought perception that we can just dissolve. We can't. So given the fact that we just can't just dissolve, I think it'd be useful to add in like the process of this resolution, how it would work and how that would pan out in general, which is not really here. So worthwhile clarifying. This is just the record of society as to how they're kept, where they're kept, nothing crazy. 21 is prohibition of discrimination. So yeah, it basically tells us that we need to follow our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the British Columbia Human Rights Code, so we should not be violating those. These are some of the external legislation that we're choosing to adhere by because we should. I think it's also on the Societies Act that we need to. So something to keep in mind. Bylaw 22 is the permissive bylaw. So this is basically in any context when there's a dispute between a group's constitution and our bylaws. Our bylaws, if they fall under us, should prevail. Yeah, pretty simple. Did somebody? Okay. For bylaw 23 is society fees, how that works. That's honestly the VP finance problem, not a Judah problem. Bylaw 24, location of society's operations. So that just defines where we are at. That's nothing, it's more ceremonial than anything. And this is a recent addition, I believe, and there are typos here. But bylaw 25 is the investment restrictions that we have that basically outlines that we basically cannot invest in things that are oil and gas and coal and all these like all these kind of issues, greenhouse gas issues, creator things. Sorry, brain fog. So that's something that was adopted, I believe, the last AGM. So yeah, that's basically saying that we cannot invest in those companies. But yeah, that's basically all we have. There's a page number situation here that doesn't match, but I do want to start us looking into and allocating bylaws for folks to review, so it's more manageable versus than just making one or two people do all of it once. Given the fact that we have 5 people on this committee, that's again 5 bylaws per person. But I did want to give folks a overview before I drop a bylaw in your lap and make you basically review it. Good resource as to what is okay and not okay in it most likely would be the Societies Act and the Universities Act. And if you could double check to make sure it's kind of sort of around our policies. If not, do make a note of it so we can go back and change the policy if we have to. Yeah. I do want to open up for questions, comments.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks for the quick overview. In terms of timing, I was requesting if committee members could prioritize bylaws in election by elections and referendum. One, because we have the report that I provided has like some very urgent bylaws amendments recommendations. And then once that is done, then we can switch over to other bylaws.
Okay, so that should be elections bylaw 13, right?
Yeah, bylaw 13. And whoever who decides to take that can use the report to kind of use that to recommend. And I'll also provide previous reports from 2016 because they've been a consistency with which bylaws need to be amended.
Amazing. Thank you,
Yeah.
Beatty.
No worries.
Okay, on the list is Ben. Go ahead.
One thing to note is that bylaw 16 does actually have some reasonably significant issues that do need to be fixed.
Okay. Noted. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay, seeing that I will update our docs to make sure people can sign up for a bylaw review. Something tells me I'll be doing bylaw 13 because there are a couple bylaws that I personally have vendettas against, bylaw 13 being one of them. So that's something to know. Beatty, I think you'll be hearing from me. All right, seeing that there are no further discussions on this, I think we can, in good spirit, move to adjournment. So motion reads, be it resolved to adjourn the meeting at 4:47 p.m. I will move. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. Moving into the vote, seeking unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you everyone for coming out, and I will see you all in 2 weeks' time.
Hopefully on Wednesday.